All right, everybody, week 146 is here just ahead of the holidays, but I will be continuing this throughout the holidays. As you can see, I've got a hopped up 6-year-old here behind me, so we're just going to have to deal with that distraction today. So, weathering the storm. This is what's really going on in the Toronto real estate market right now. We talked about 2 weeks ago a number of red flags when you're absorbing real estate news. And I really want you to keep that top of mind this year, especially as you're in the holidays. You're going to be absorbing more content in the social space. So just beware of some of the content that you are seeing and understand that a lot of these people are highlighting very specific situations that aren't necessarily a picture of how the entire market is performing. Yes, there are properties that are selling for less today than they did before. There are a lot of people that have entered into agreements when the market was hot that have to close on those properties now, and they happen to be worth less than they were before. So that's creating some problems for some buyers, especially in the pre-construction space. And I'm sure you've seen this story where there are people protesting to get the developer to work with them to be able to close on these properties. And I really do think that developers need to show some flexibility right now. But at the same time, if there was a massive gain on that property, would these people be, giving that money back? Or like, would this conversation even be happening? No. But again, I guess it's not really a reasonable way to look at it. So looking at week 146, what I noticed was really, really important. Hey, can you please stop moving around? I need you to calm down for a moment. Thank you. I got to finish this. So you can draw, please, and then I'll continue this. Then we'll go have lunch after. Sorry about that. I'm not even going to edit this because I don't have time for that. So what we are talking about here is supply. And I know we've talked about supply quite a bit, but I want to show you some numbers here. And let me get to the screen. And this is the screen that I'm looking at right here. In June 2022 is when our supply essentially peaked. And a lot of people might be surprised by that. It's like, really? Because, June, it was just the tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of what was to come. We had nearly 2,000 condo listings and 625 house listings June 28th, 2022. But remember that we had only had a 1.25% increase in rates by that time. The worst was yet to come. So naturally, you would expect that after June, we would have really damaging numbers in terms of real estate prices and inventory as people got over their heads, or they can't afford their mortgages because all these people were talking about things like trigger points and people reaching these maximum interest rates, which would make their entire payment go towards interest. And then another increase would mean that there wouldn't even be enough to cover the interests. But there are a lot of ways banks are combating this thing. Sometimes banks are extending the amortization period to allow for that lower payment to go more towards just the interest or some towards principal. Even with TD, some of them are just starting to act like reverse mortgages, but of course, until they get to an 80-20 loan to value ratio. And I can dig into that more. If you want to message me, we can talk about that. But there are so many different ways in which banks and borrowers are managing these increased rates that we don't have any panic in the marketplace. And what was really interesting to see is we had, where is my actual number here, 0.275% in rate increases after June 28th. But what's really interesting to see is what's happened to supply during that time. 364 active listings right now for houses and 1,341 active listings for condos. Almost half the number of houses on the market and let's say 600 fewer condos on the market right now. And because of, the average price has changed as well. But remember, I talked about this 3 weeks ago, is most of the price adjustments have been happening in that higher end detached market, not so much in the entry level like condos or houses under $2 million, et cetera. So this change in average price is not necessarily a reflection of an entire drop in prices across the board. So there's just so much more context that needs to be added to this whole situation. And again, I don't have this on the blog yet, so we're using the draft copy. Normally there would be charts here, so when you come back to the blog later, you can read these charts. But the worst of the increases came after June 2022. But then that's when, like I've said over and over again, we do not have panicked buyers and sellers here in Toronto. I'm sorry, we don't have panic sellers, I guess is more important to say. And they just pulled their properties off the market, and if they weren't getting the prices that they wanted. So another layer that just makes me so much more comfortable in the Toronto real estate market, understanding that things are not as bad as some would lead you to believe. And I've got some interesting advice on the blog this week for buyers and sellers. And what's really important, especially if you're a buyer right now, is to understand why you are in the market, first of all. And number two, if you're in the market right now, if you're like most buyers, you are probably looking for a deal. And the biggest mistake buyers are making right now is not defining what a deal actually means to them. Is it $100,000 off a property? Is it $500,000 off a property? We need to be very specific and define what deal means to you as a buyer. Because if you don't do that, you're just going to spin your wheels and move the goalposts on every single property that you see, and you're not going to end up buying anything because nothing's going to seem like a good enough deal. And that is a true reflection of the market. There really aren't a ton of properties out there that are complete steals based on where they were priced earlier this year. There are some, and I do highlight one on the blog in the Gerrard India Bazaar area. It's a property that's listed at $1.7 million, and you can potentially start a negotiation in the 1.3s. And if that's not a good enough deal for you right now, then this is not the market for you to buy in. Toronto is probably not the market for you to buy in because we don't have crazy deals across the board. Why? Because there isn't a ton of supply. The only way we're going to have a situation where we have a full-on buyer's market where there are phenomenal deals one after another is if listing supply increases and increases and increases. But we've been doing the exact opposite, especially since June, which was the peak inventory for Toronto. Peak fear was June. People didn't know what was going on, but they slowly figured it out and they calmed down and they pulled their properties off the market. So what's going to happen going forward? I mean, I don't want to say your guess is as good as mine because we do have a bit of a window into what's coming. I personally think supply is going to continue to pull back. Excuse me, I've had a bit of a throat thing. But supply naturally pulls back around this time of year. It's the holidays. It is what it is. There might be a little bit added as we head into 2023. But again, people just aren't waiting for like the winter market or the spring market. That's not really a conversation right now. Right now is not a time you should be on the market unless you absolutely have to. We talked about move up buyers. They should be on the market right now to move up into that bigger asset that they're going to save multiple six figures on, depending on the level in which you're buying. You should only be selling if you have specific use for the funds from your home. If you do not have any use for that money, keep it in the property, wait. End of 2023, beginning of 2024 will be a much better time for you to get that property on the market to maximize your return, especially if you're younger. This is not the time to panic. You've got loads of time to ride out what's happening right now. So I would really encourage you guys to get into this blog this week and look at the numbers and really help. Hopefully it'll calm you a little bit. There's been a lot of anxiety-inducing content out there these days. Know that June was the peak of the worst when it came to the number of supply and sort of sentiment overall from buyers and sellers. Things have improved since then, despite rates going up, because number one, sellers understand where they stand. If they can't get that number they need, they just aren't coming to market. Buyers seem to be understanding that this high rate environment, and let's use high in relative terms here because we've had higher rates here and the markets have performed way better than they are now. Buyers are starting to understand that this is not some sort of quick, all of a sudden we're going to go back to 0% interest rates tomorrow. So they're slowly wrapping their heads around getting into the market. So buyer sentiment should slowly improve throughout 2023. And banks understand that they need to work with homeowners to make sure that they can stay in their homes. Like nobody is interested in having a whole bunch of defaults across the board. So there's a lot of people really coming to terms with where we are, where we're going, and making plans to work together to make things happen. So We're going to leave it there this week. I will be posting next week as well on the 27th, which will be the last post of 2022. Next week, I will be providing some 2023 insight and more specific information about that. In the meantime, please reach out. Make sure you go to realestateraccoons.com. We have a custom search tool there. And make sure you're following me on Instagram. Make sure you're subbed on YouTube. All these places. We've got some cool video content coming up in the coming weeks. And maybe you get to see Boo Boo again. And she's dancing around behind me, behind my chair over there. Have a good day. Thank you so much.